I just would have hugged her longer before walking out the door if I knew that was going to be my last time seeing her.
She was, oh God, she was full of hope. She was full of life. She was full of promise, and all she wanted on this earth was to be loved.
Breaking news just hours ago, authorities arresting the man accused of killing a pregnant woman in Monroe. Dorreous Brooks was taken into custody in Barrow County. Sheriff Judd Smith telling our Cody Alcorn he'll be taken to Walton County to now face murder charges. According to Monroe Police, Brooks shot Teonia Stokes on Sunday, and Stokes was pregnant with a baby boy and leaves behind a 2-year-old daughter. Family members say she was a student teaching in Gwinnett County and was set to graduate in May from Kennesaw State. Tonight, only here on 11 Alive, her family is speaking out on what would have been her 23rd birthday.
So we were making funeral arrangements on her birthday.
Such a sweet person.
Isn't it disturbing how many of these stories start the same way? A woman, a man she trusted, and a version of events that falls apart the moment anyone actually looks at it? In April, most of the country was still talking about a woman named Ashley Jenne. She'd flown to Zanzibar for her birthday. Her boyfriend proposed on camera. Followers watched the whole thing unfold in real time. Days later, she was dead in a hotel room, and the story her boyfriend gave police did not match what her own family was seeing online. We were still sitting with that one when a name out of Georgia started circulating. A woman, 7 months pregnant, shot inside a home in the middle of the night. The man beside her when it happened, the one she'd publicly called her safe space, survived. For nearly a month, everyone assumed he was the second victim. He wasn't. Today we're going into the case of Teonia Stokes, a Kennesaw State senior, 2 days from her birthday, months from graduation, and the 2 men who are now both charged with her murder, including the one everyone believed had survived alongside her. This case involves the death of a pregnant woman and her unborn child, along with details some viewers may find disturbing. Please take that into consideration before continuing. If this is your first time here, welcome to Crime Scene Hive. Subscribe, like this video, share it with someone who needs to see it, and drop a comment letting us know what city or country you're watching from tonight. It starts, like a lot of these cases do. It happened just after 2:30 in the morning on Sunday, January the 25th, 2026. The location was the 100 block of G.W. Carver Drive, inside a home in Monroe, Georgia, a small city roughly 50 miles southeast of Atlanta. Monroe police officers responded to reports of gunfire inside the residence. When they arrived, they found 2 people suffering from gunshot wounds. One of them was 22-year-old Teonia Stokes. She was pronounced deceased at the scene. The other was 25-year-old Curdarious Williams, who was found with a gunshot wound and transported to a local hospital for treatment. Teonia Stokes was 7 months pregnant at the time of the shooting. She was carrying a baby boy, due in April. Her unborn son did not survive. At the time of her death, Teonia was a senior at Kennesaw State University, majoring in elementary education. She had earned placement on both the Dean's List and the President's List across multiple semesters, and she was in the middle of a student teaching placement at Decola Elementary School. She was on track to graduate in May, just months away from finishing a degree she had spent years working toward. She was also a mother. Teonia had a 2-year-old daughter, and family members say she was deeply involved in her daughter's day-to-day life, balancing coursework, student teaching, and parenting in the final stretch before graduation. The timing of her death carried its own weight independent of the circumstances. Teonia was killed 2 days before her 23rd birthday. She was also less than 3 months from walking across the graduation stage at Kennesaw State. In the hours after the shooting, Monroe Police secured the scene and began the process of identifying everyone involved and establishing what had happened inside that home. Officers and detectives worked to preserve evidence, interview witnesses, and determine how 2 people ended up shot inside a residence in the middle of the night. Given the death of Teonia's unborn son alongside her, the case was not opened as a single homicide. Monroe Police began investigating it as a felony murder case that would also carry a feticide charge, a designation that legally treats the loss of the unborn child as a separate count tied to the same act of violence. At this stage, no arrest had been made. No suspect had been publicly named. What investigators had was a crime scene, 2 gunshot victims, one of them dead, and a case that was about to move fast. Teonia Stokes was raised in Social Circle, Georgia, a small city in Walton County with a population of just a few thousand people, the kind of place where, as her family described it, people tend to know each other by name. She was one of 4 siblings, and within her family she went by the name T, a shortened version of Teonia that had stuck with her since childhood. Family members who spoke publicly after her death described her as dependable and consistently present for the people around her, a description that came up repeatedly from different relatives independently of one another. Her sister, Demetia Sparks, and her aunt, Cal Durham, both spoke about her sense of responsibility toward family, a theme that carried into how she approached her education and her role as a parent.
Such a sweet person.
She was always there for each one of us.
And a mother.
She was proud of a girl that she already got.
She was, oh God. She was full of hope. She was full of life. She was full of promise. And all she wanted on this earth was to be loved.
Academically, Teonia had built a strong record at Kennesaw State University. She had earned a spot on both the Dean's List and the President's List during multiple semesters, distinctions reserved for students maintaining high grade point averages while carrying a full course load. She had chosen elementary education as her major, and by the time of her death, she was completing her required student teaching placement at Decola Elementary School in Gwinnett County. Those who worked with her in that setting described her as someone who connected easily with young children, an observation her family later said was reflected in how the students at Decola Elementary reacted to the news of her death. Outside of school, Teonia was already a mother. She had a young daughter, and by her family's account, she structured much of her routine, her schedule, and her long-term planning around her daughter's stability and her own progress toward finishing her degree. By every account from people who knew her, Teonia believed she had built something stable for herself and her daughter, a foundation of school, family, and home that felt secure. That belief would matter more than she could have known once investigators began looking into who was inside that house with her on the night she died. Once the scene on G.W. Carver Drive was secured, Monroe Police Chief R.V. Watts said detectives immediately took steps to preserve evidence, identify everyone connected to the case, and begin establishing a motive. That process required more than one department working alone. Monroe Police brought in assistance from several outside agencies almost immediately. The Walton County Sheriff's Office and the Walton County District Attorney's Office were involved early, along with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. The Social Circle Police Department and the Georgia Department of Community Supervision also assisted, given Teonia's hometown connection and any supervision records tied to individuals in the case. As the investigation widened, the Newton County Sheriff's Office, Covington Police Department, and Rockdale County Sheriff's Office joined the effort as well. This kind of multi-agency coordination is not unusual in Georgia homicide cases that cross jurisdictional lines, but the number of departments involved here, 7 in total by the time the case was resolved, reflects how quickly investigators were working to run down leads, question witnesses, and track a suspect who had not yet been located. By Tuesday, January the 27th, 2 days after the shooting, investigators had enough evidence to take action. Monroe Police announced they had obtained arrest warrants for 36-year-old Dorreous Brooks, of Monroe. Brooks was charged with felony murder and feticide in connection with Teonia's death and the death of her unborn son. Police described Brooks as armed and dangerous and issued a public safety warning, instructing anyone who spotted him not to approach him directly and to call 911 immediately instead. A $1,000 reward was offered for information leading to his capture, and Detective Mitch Studdard and Sergeant Josh Reynolds were named as the point-of-contact investigators for tips coming in from the public. At this point in the investigation, Brooks was the only named suspect. Police had not yet disclosed a motive, and the relationship, if any, between Brooks and the two shooting victims had not been made public. What investigators did have was a name, an active warrant, and a manhunt now spanning multiple counties. If you want to understand exactly how a case like this moves from crime scene to conviction, this channel breaks down the investigation start to finish, not just the headlines. Subscribe so you don't miss what happens once Brooks is found. The manhunt for Dorreous Brooks did not last long. On Tuesday night, January the 27th, less than 24 hours after warrants were issued, law enforcement located and arrested him in Barrow County. Chief Watts credited the arrest to assistance from the Walton County Sheriff's Office and the Barrow County Sheriff's Office, saying Brooks was taken into custody without incident. He was transferred to Walton County to face the charges connected to Teonia's death and the death of her unborn son. When he appeared before a judge, bond was denied, meaning Brooks would remain in custody as the case moved forward rather than being released while awaiting trial. The full scope of the charges against him became clear in the days that followed. Brooks was charged with felony murder and feticide, the same charges announced when the warrants were first issued. But police also disclosed additional counts: possession of a weapon by a convicted felon, and possession of a weapon during the commission of a felony, both of which point to a prior criminal record on Brooks's part. Beyond that, he was charged with aggravated assault, aggravated battery, and reckless conduct. Chief Watts publicly thanked the officers, deputies, detectives, and agents from every agency involved, calling the partnership between departments instrumental in bringing what he described as a tragic situation toward resolution. At this point, from the outside, the case looked complete. A suspect had been identified within 48 hours. He had been arrested within 3 days of the shooting. He was facing multiple serious charges, and a judge had already denied him bond. For nearly a month, this looked like a closed case: one victim, one unborn child lost, one man in custody, and a legal process now underway. That version of events was about to change in a way almost nobody following the case at the time expected. Cases like this one are exactly why we cover the full timeline instead of stopping at the first arrest. If you want to see what happened next, and why this case did not end where everyone assumed it would, subscribe now so you're here when we cover it. January the 27th was supposed to be Teonia's 23rd birthday. Instead, her family spent that day at a funeral home, making arrangements for her burial and the burial of her unborn son.
So we were making funeral arrangements on her birthday.
That evening, family and friends gathered at Friendship Park in Social Circle for a vigil. It was held in Teonia's hometown, roughly 17 miles from where she was killed. People who attended lit candles and spoke her name and her son's name together, marking the loss of both in a single gathering rather than treating them as separate. Teonia's mother was not able to attend. According to family members, the weight of planning a funeral while grieving her daughter and grandson became too much, and she was hospitalized. Her absence at the vigil was noted publicly by relatives speaking to reporters that same day. Several family members spoke about Teonia in the days surrounding the vigil. Her father, Joe Stokes, said simply that his daughter did not deserve what happened to her. Her sister, Jada Stokes, echoed that sentiment, describing the unfairness of losing her sister just before what should have been a celebration. Her aunt, Cal Durham, spoke about who Teonia was as a person, describing her as full of hope and full of promise, someone whose life had been oriented entirely toward a future she was working hard to reach.
She was full of hope. She was full of life. She was full of promise. And all she wanted on this earth was to be loved.
Her sister, Demetia Sparks, focused on what had been taken from the students at Decola Elementary, saying the children Teonia had been working with as a student teacher were devastated by the news and would never get the chance to see what she would have offered them as a full-time teacher.
The world didn't get a chance to see what she was going to offer. She loved children. The kids that she left behind at Decola Elementary, I know they're devastated.
The reaction extended beyond family. Kennesaw State University issued a public statement extending condolences to Teonia's family and friends, acknowledging her as a student who was months away from completing her degree. For a family already absorbing the loss of a daughter, a sister, and an unborn grandchild. The days following January 25th were not about answers. They were about survival, funeral arrangements, a hospitalized mother, and a community trying to hold a vigil for two people who were supposed to still be here. For nearly a month, the case against Dorreous Brooks moved forward as the only active prosecution tied to Teonia's death. Then, on Friday, February the 20th, Monroe Police announced a second arrest. Curdarious Williams, the 25-year-old man who had been shot alongside Teonia on the night of January the 25th, and who family members have identified as the father of her unborn son, had been released from medical care following treatment for his gunshot wound. Upon his release, he was taken into custody. Williams was booked on charges of murder and feticide, the same core charges facing Brooks. He was also charged with possession of a weapon by a convicted felon and possession of a weapon during the commission of a felony. Monroe Police released a statement explaining the basis for the arrest. Detectives said that following a comprehensive investigation, they had concluded that the death of Teonia Stokes resulted from the actions of both Dorreous Brooks and Curdarious Williams. The department did not elaborate further in that statement on how Williams's actions specifically contributed to her death, given that he had also been shot during the same incident. This detail changed the shape of the entire case. For weeks, public reporting and family statements had described Williams as a second victim, a man who survived the same gunfire that killed Teonia. Police were now saying that his actions were among those that led to her death, placing him not alongside her as a victim, but alongside Brooks as a person legally responsible for it. As of the most recent information available, Monroe Police have not publicly disclosed what connection existed between Brooks and Williams, whether they knew each other prior to that night, or what motive led to the shooting. Investigators have also not clarified the specific role each man is alleged to have played inside that house. What is confirmed is the charging decision itself: 2 men, one shot and hospitalized that night, the other tracked down through a multi-county manhunt, now facing the same core charges in the same case. The relationship between the 2 men, and the full explanation for what happened inside that home, remains part of an active and ongoing legal process. If you want to see how this case gets resolved once both men face court, and what investigators eventually reveal about what connected them, subscribe now so you're here for that outcome. As of the most recent reporting available on this case, Dorreous Brooks was scheduled to return to court in March, according to Walton County court records. No trial date, plea, or verdict has been publicly reported beyond that scheduled appearance. Curdarious Williams's case is also active, though a court calendar for his charges has not been made public. Monroe Police have not released additional details connecting Brooks and Williams. It remains publicly unknown whether the 2 men knew each other before that night, what brought them into the same house, or what triggered the gunfire that killed Teonia and her unborn son. Investigators have also not disclosed which man is alleged to have fired the shot that killed her, or how each man's actions are legally being treated within the case. What is confirmed is this: 2 men are facing felony murder and feticide charges in connection with the same death. One was a stranger to the public until his name appeared on a warrant. The other was, by his own account and by family description, the father of the child Teonia was carrying and the man she publicly called her partner. Teonia's daughter is now 3 years old. She was not present the night her mother was killed, and her family has said she is too young to understand what happened. In time, she will grow up with questions this case has not yet answered: who her mother was, what happened to her, and why 2 men who were both in that house that night are now both facing charges in her death. Teonia's family has said publicly that their focus is on accountability, for her, and for the son who did not get the chance to be born. Whatever the courts eventually determine, that son remains part of the case's official record, a life the state of Georgia has legally recognized as taken, even without a name. 2 people went into that house on G.W. Carver Drive believing they were safe. By the time investigators finished their work, both the shooting and the story behind it had turned into something neither the public, nor apparently Teonia herself, ever saw coming.